July 28th, 2025, 6 o'clock in the morning. Taishitun, on the northeastern outskirts of Beijing, in Miyun district. Nearly 100 kilometers from the center of the capital, the morning began not with traffic and glass towers, but with a gray sky, flooded streets, and the relentless sound of rain. It had already been falling for several days, and local residents had grown used to the noise against their roofs. Some checked their courtyards, some tried to call relatives, others simply waited for the water to go down. But in the mountains, something was happening that almost no one below could see. Rivers and streams were collecting rainfall from a vast area. The soil could no longer absorb any more water, and the runoff was converging into the same basin. Within hours, the familiar Qingshui River was turning into a force capable of tearing apart roads and bridges. Water began rushing into the streets of Taishitun. It carried branches, mud, debris, and vehicles. And at that very moment, one of the most vulnerable facilities in the area was still not considered a place that needed to be evacuated first. The rain had not begun all at once. Starting on July 23rd, northern Beijing and neighboring parts of China had been hit by a series of powerful downpours. At first, it looked like a severe summer weather event. Then the numbers became alarming. In some areas, more than 540 millimeters of rain fell in just a few days, almost as much as Beijing normally receives in an entire year. In mountainous Huairu, more than 95 millimeters fell in a single hour. Meteorological agencies raised warning levels, authorities closed dangerous roads, moved residents out of high-risk areas, and prepared for floods and landslides. But the greatest danger was not simply the amount of rain. Northern Beijing is a landscape of mountains, narrow valleys, small rivers, and settlements where floodwater can arrive far faster than a map suggests. Rain fell onto already saturated ground, rushed down the slopes, and poured into river channels. With every passing hour, it became clearer that this was no longer just a heavy storm. But even then, almost no one understood how quickly the scale of the threat was about to change. By the morning of July 28th, the system was beginning to fail in several places at once. Flash floods and landslides were reported in Miyun. Water cut off villages. Power failed. Mobile communication disappeared. The Miyun Reservoir, the largest in northern China, was receiving record inflows. Streams that normally looked harmless became violent brown rivers. Cars floated along roads. Trees were torn from the ground. Places where a person could have crossed a stream on stones the day before were now filled with torrents powerful enough to slam into concrete walls. By midday, Beijing authorities raised the rainstorm warning to red, the highest level. The city prepared for another wave of rainfall. Trips were canceled, public spaces were closed, and residents were told to remain indoors. Tens of thousands of people were already being moved out of dangerous areas. It seemed that the system was responding, but the disaster was developing faster than the risk lists could be updated. And this was where a mistake emerged that would later become the defining symbol of the tragedy. The Qingshui River runs through Taishitun. Under normal conditions, it is a relatively small waterway, difficult to imagine as the source of a catastrophic flood. But that morning, according to authorities, its flow increased to roughly 1,500 times its normal level. The peak discharge more than doubled a record that had stood for over a century. The water carried trees and debris that clogged passages, raised water levels, and increased pressure on riverbanks and bridges. Embankments overflowed and failed. The current changed direction sharply around bends and burst into places where no one expected it. Streets vanished beneath muddy water. The flood slammed into houses, broke fences, overturned cars, and forced people onto upper floors and rooftops. In some places, the water rose to nearly 2 meters, and the higher it climbed, the harder it became for rescuers to reach those trapped inside buildings. But at one location, almost no time remained. On low-lying ground near the river stood the Taishitun Elderly Care Center. That day, elderly residents and staff were inside the facility. Many of the residents had limited mobility or could not move independently at all. For them, The instruction to move to higher ground was not a simple action. For some, even a few meters to a staircase or window became an impossible distance. When the water entered the grounds, it rose too quickly. Rooms filled with muddy floodwater. Furniture began to float. Doors jammed. Electricity disappeared. Rescuers fought their way toward the building through strong currents, using boats and ropes and pulling people out through windows. One woman, 87 years old, somehow managed to climb onto a windowsill and survive, according to her daughter. Her roommate could not. Early reports showed footage of dozens of people being successfully rescued, but the full picture was far worse. It later emerged that the center had not been included in the advance evacuation plan at all. For years, it had been considered to be in a safe location. That became the turning point of the entire story. More than 16,000 residents of Miyun had been evacuated in advance, yet a facility filled with people least able to save themselves had remained outside the plan. Local authorities later acknowledged serious gaps in preparedness and an inadequate understanding of the risks posed by extreme weather. In July 2025, officials reported that 31 people had died at the center, but an investigation approved in 2026 later revised the final number to 32. The commission concluded that the immediate cause was a record-breaking flood. Days of heavy rain, coinciding flood peaks in the main river and its tributaries, debris accumulation, overflowing and breached protective structures, and then the rapid inundation of the low-lying site. At the same time, the investigation identified weaknesses in flood monitoring, early warning, embankment inspection, and preparedness at elderly care facilities. It was a natural disaster, intensified by a human failure to recognize exactly where the greatest vulnerability was. Outside the care center, the scale of the disaster continued to grow. Electricity disappeared in more than 100 villages. Communications failed. Roads turned into river channels. Some communities became almost completely isolated. More than 80,000 people were relocated across Beijing. When the water finally began to recede, the numbers were difficult to reconcile with the image of a modern capital. Hundreds of thousands of people affected, tens of thousands of homes damaged, hundreds of bridges damaged, and hundreds of kilometers of roads destroyed or impaired. The official death toll in Beijing reached 44. Rescue teams cleared debris, reopened routes, and delivered water and food to places that could still not be reached by normal vehicles. Streets were covered with overturned cars, tree trunks, and thick layers of mud. Dirty lines on building walls showed how high the water had risen. The disaster lasted for several days, but the market left on the northern districts of the capital would be measured for far longer. The flood of 2025 became a reminder of an uncomfortable truth about modern disasters. Today, we can watch storm systems from satellites, build forecasts, issue red alerts, and move tens of thousands of people before the worst arrives. But no system works perfectly if its map of danger is based on what happened in the past. The Taishitun Care Center had been considered safe precisely because history had not provided enough reason to believe otherwise. Then a flood arrived that exceeded the old limits. After the investigation, 17 officials from 9 government departments were held accountable, and the recommendations specifically called for stronger protection of vulnerable facilities, including elderly care centers. But the most important lesson does not fit neatly into an administrative report. During an extreme event, the most dangerous places may not be the ones everyone already considers risky. They may be the places that have been considered safe for years. That morning, northern Beijing did not disappear beneath the water, but it took only a few hours to reveal that sometimes the distance between a safe zone and a deadly trap exists only on paper.